Hi, my name's Gary Ford, Managing Director of Tiger Hobbies Limited, UK Hobby Imports and Distributors, and welcome to Series 6 of Tiger Hobbies D-Day to VJ Day mini-series about the last year of World War II. In our last series we covered the British Army and its trials and tribulations in World War II, up to the massive 21st Army Group led by Field Marshal Montgomery in late 1944 to March of 1945. In this new series, we shall look at the end of the war in Europe from March 1945 to early May 1945. Also in this series, we will look at the Soviet juggernaut that was in late 1944 starting to smash the Germans on the Eastern Front. We shall look at the Soviet Union, its rise a little, and its journey from revolution to pain in blood to beat the Nazis. Joseph Stalin, or Uncle Joe it was known by the Western Allies, had a number of quotes, and one was, "In the war, Great Britain bought time, the USA bought the machinery of war, and the Soviet Union paid in blood." This is actually a fairly true statement, because no one really knows how many were lost by the Soviet Union fighting the Nazis. A minimum is, say, 20 million, but some historians state closer to 27 million and even higher. Whatever the figure is, it was a lot more than the Western Allies. Great Britain and the Commonwealth lost some 360,000. The USA, just over 400,000. And we must not forget our Chinese allies, who lost close to 15 million against the Japanese on our behalf. We will go back a little to the Tsarist Russia, when the boot of the Romanovs was on the neck of the ordinary Russian, and to the revolution of 1917, and Lenin, then the rise of the Georgian Joseph Stalin, and the 5-year plans of the 1920s and 30s to turn the Soviet Union into a massive industrial nation. Then the military purges, when Stalin basically went mad, and then Hitler's Nazis trying to kick the back door in only to have frostbite on their toes. Finally, to the two pivotal battles that hammered down the nails in the Nazi coffin, Operation Bagration and the Battle for Berlin. We shall also look at the Western Allies push east after crossing the Rhine, the USA meeting the Soviet army on the Elbe, and Montgomery getting the Nazis to sign the piece of paper to start to draw the war in Europe to an end in May 1945, especially for the British. So, welcome to episode 1, Tsarist Russia and the Seeds of Revolution. The term Tsar, from the Latin word Caesar or emperor, was first used in medieval times by Slavic and Eastern European monarchs, but from 1547, Ivan IV, known as Ivan the Terrible, became the first Tsar of Russia, starting the reign of the Tsars until 1917. Ivan the Terrible would turn Russia from a medieval state to the beginnings of an empire and started to embrace diplomatic relations with the likes of England. The nickname, the Terrible, may have been Western propaganda, or may have a meaning in Russian called formidable, or it could have just been plain bloody terrible. In 1613, after a period of troubles in Russia, Michael Romanov became Michael I of Russia and started the Romanov dynasty, which would set Russia on the road to being one of the powerhouses of Europe with a massive empire. In 1682, aged just 10 years old, a young boy called Peter officially became Peter I, but Tsar in name only, with others ruling and co-ruling. But at the age of 22, in 1704, he became sole sovereign and will be known as Peter the Great, founding the Russian Navy, modernization of Russia in reforms, sciences, and moving the capital from Moscow to St. Petersburg, plus fighting a series of wars and ongoing and conquering lands in the Baltic, and fighting the Ottoman Empire and the Great North War with Sweden. And in 1791, he named himself Emperor of Russia until his death in 1725. After the death of Elizabeth Petronova, Empress of Russia, childless in 1762, her nephew, German-born Peter, became Peter III, Emperor of Russia. He was a bit of a wet fish really, but he was married to one total shark called Sophia Augusta Frederica. As a Prussian prince not popular with native Russians, and just 6 months after coming to power, his wife, in cahoots with other Russian nobles and military officers, possibly some of her lovers, stormed into the Winter Palace and took the reins of power and took the name Catherine II, Peter III tried to escape by boat, but was captured and soon died in mysterious circumstances, maybe chucked out of an upper floor window. Known as Catherine the Great, she would, in her time, extend the Russian Empire by 200,000 miles, including taking over countries as the Crimea, the Caucasus, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Poland and even Alaska. Catherine the Great oversaw many reforms in public health and the economics of Russia, but beneath the splendour of court life and the wealth of nobility was a massive Russian underclass, the serfs. The serf, a bonded peasant just above that of slavery, or in some cases former slaves, of which Catherine owned 500,000 serfs, and the state almost 3 million, and millions more under the Russian nobility. The serf lived a terrible life. Even as a child, if they were born into serfdom. And it wasn't until 1861 Tsar Alexander II emancipated the serfs, who by the time were 40% of the Russian population. It was not until the late 19th century the last serfs were freed in areas of Russia. But even after emancipation, poverty among ex-serfs and lower Russian classes was rife. And the only reason they were freed was to avoid uprisings and potential revolution. In the mid-19th century, two German philosophers, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, came up with the idea of political philosophy and socio-economics. This was Marxism. Just like George Orwell many years later, Engels spent time in industrial England, including Salford, working in industry as his father thought it would take him away from his more radical thoughts. In fact, he was on his way to Britain that he met Karl Marx in Cologne. Both thought each other elitist and were not impressed. But whilst in Britain, Engels observed the terrible poverty in northern industrial towns, including child labour in horrendous conditions. There was industrialisation in Germany, but nothing like the poverty and misuse of its workers as seen in Britain. He wrote to Karl Marx about poverty in northern England and soon published works on the failure of capitalism in Great Britain. Marx published Das Kapital in 1867, the manual for Marxism, and both Marx and Engels thought if a workers' revolution was to happen, it would happen in places like Britain and Germany, where the working classes had some education against a developed industrial society. They never thought it would happen in Russia, as vast amounts of the working class or freed serfs had little or no education. Back in Russia in the late 19th century, Tzar Nicolas II ruled with an iron fist, and the rise in industrialisation left the working class Russians either living on the land, eking out a living, or in squalor in the industrial cities. In 1870, a child was born, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, to a middle-class family in Simbirsk on the Volga. His parents were monarchists, but his elder brother Alexander, or Sasha, was involved with anti-Tsar activities at university and was actually arrested in a plot to actually kill the Tsar. He was hanged in 1887. Though Vladimir, he went to university to study law when he was drawn into low-level demonstrations against the government and was banned from university. He joined a revolutionary group and discovered the book Das Kapital by Karl Marx and later Engels' Communist Manifesto. And by early 1890s was working as a barrister assistant in Marxist revolutionary cell called the Social Democrats. He visited Paris where he studied the Paris Commune of 1871. Aye, the communards, remember, don't leave me this way, an early form of proletarian society, and Berlin connecting with German Marxists before returning to Russia. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov was arrested with 40 others for sedition and sentenced to 3 years exile in Siberia, but not in some prison, but living a fairly reasonable life. He was not deemed to have been much of a threat to society, so he was doing some swimming, some duck hunting and lots of reading and writing. It was while in Siberia there was a river called the Lena, and from this he took his surname Lenin in 1901 after returning from exile. In 1902, under Lenin, he published What Is to Be Done, which he hoped would lead to the workers' revolution. He was also involved in the RSDLP, the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, a congress and meeting place, who did not like the Socialist Revolutionary Party. It's all a bit like Monty Python's People's Front of Judea and the Judea Popular People's Front, splitters. The RSDLP split themselves into Lenin's majoritarians, known as the Bolsheviks, and the minoritarians, known as the Mensheviks. This went on until 1905, until the RSDLP Central Committee was ruled by the Bolsheviks. In part 2, we shall look at the Russian Revolution and the rise of Uncle Joe Stalin.